This panel is called Read the Rules, and we're going to go into a lot of different directions around when people mess up rules, how they mess up rules, why they mess up rules, why many of you have probably never even read the rules to a lot of the games that you play.
Also good things about rules, not just messing up.
And I'll introduce our panelists. First, we have Luke Peterschmidt, who is not here.
Ooh.
I'm Rim. I host the podcast called GeekNights. I lecture around the world on game design, game theory, theory of games, and sometimes anime.
I'm Scott. I do all the same shit that Rim does.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
And I'm Dr. Sean Cashman. I teach communication, but I also am really fascinated by games, and I do another panels here. I'm really involved in the community and an amateur game designer myself, so this is a lot of fun.
All right. So in case you weren't paying attention, schmuck, doctor. You got that straight?
Yeah,
Okay.
2 undergraduate degrees don't add up to a doctorate. That's not how the victory points work.
All right.
So we got a lot of different directions we can go, but what I want to start with is just a few case studies. And we have anecdotes. I'm sure some of you have anecdotes. We're not going to let you talk, but we're going to be talking. But if you go to Board Game Reddit, or if you go to Board Game forums, or you go into a Board Game BBS with your dial-up modem, because I'm pretty old at this point, you always see the same threads. And the threads are always, 1, how do I find people to play games with? But number 2 is, why did my D&D group explode into drama? But number 3 is, I messed up the rules. How do I play this game?
I've been playing this game wrong for 10 years. Oh, my God. How does this happen?
So I guess, how does this happen? Like at a high level, how does this thread, do not try to read the more you read those paragraphs, the sadder you're going to get. This dude's been playing Carcassonne wrong his entire life. Well, 2 years. His entire gaming life. Why does this happen? Why do we get rules wrong so often?
Well, I think one primary reason is that we don't tend to read the rules. Oftentimes, many of us, how did you learn how to play the game? Probably somebody taught you, right? I mean, the first time I sat down to play Seven Wonders, we pulled out the rule book and we started looking through it and going, oh my God. And it just kept going.
Yep, and there's only one copy of those rules, so it's not like you could all just, like, if you were all intelligent adults, what I would like to do is we all sit down, it's a new game, everyone quietly reads the rules for 10 minutes, and then we just play. Theoretically, that should work.
And it was actually at this MAGFest, too. So,
Whoa, that's a tough time to read the rules. You're in this pressure situation. It's not like you're comfortable at home where you can sit back. You're sort of in a hurry, right? You don't want to go paying attention to every single little word in there.
So this guy came along and he said, hey, are you guys going to play that? And we said, yes. Do you know how to play? He said, yes. Will you teach us? Yes. Sit. And he taught us, and he creamed us horribly. But we learned how to play through him, and I don't know if he taught us right.
But that's it. I think the majority of the games I've learned, I've played, thousands of tabletop games at this point. I'm always taught the rules by someone else who bothered to read the rules. And usually I read them later and find out what they taught me wrong. I have this terrifying story of a game called Hansa Teutonica, which has pretty complicated and poorly written rules.
Which is another game we learned at MAGFest.
Yeah, we learned it at a MAGFest from a friend who taught us the game completely wrong. So then another one of our friends says, oh, he's teaching it to you wrong. Let me teach it to you also wrong.
And then we read the rules, and we saw it was not their fault. It was the rules' fault. That's why everyone taught us everything wrong. Because I could not get the rules right even after reading the book several times.
Yep. So it's not always the rules' fault, but it sucks to read the rules. So I think we're very drawn to having someone else explain it, partly because then it's their fault. If you teach us the game and you mess it up, like, it's not my problem. I can just blame you and walk away from it. Yeah. The pressure's on if I'm reading the rules and teaching at the same time, and I don't know the game.
Yeah, I know there are some people who love reading rules. They just want to buy a board game and read the rules at home alone. Like, they just love doing that. But it seems like most people just want to play. It's like, just play. I don't want to have to. They hate reading, right? And a rules explanation for some reason is like more pleasant or less effort or less difficult than a reading. Right? I don't know why that is. It just seems to be, for most people, they would rather have a lecture than have to read the materials.
I think part of it, what might be happening too, is that tabletop's in a weird space right now, like in the last 3 or 4 years. There's a bubble of tabletop games coming out. There are more games coming out than we could ever play.
Too many.
So I read somewhere that increasingly, I suspect, a lot of people are suspecting this, that the average number of plays that the average tabletop game gets on the table is between 0 and 1 at this point.
Wow.
I mean, how many people buy a Kickstarter game and never actually play it?
How many board games you got on your shelf you've played 0 times?
At least 8.
2 at least, yeah.
Yeah, a few.
Yeah, couple.
I had Dominant Species on my shelf for years, and I've played it once.
And this does seem to be something
Recently.
unique to tabletop games. Because, I mean, like role-playing games, those are more guidelines than actual rules, right?
It depends on the role-playing game, but yeah.
You can wing it.
Kind of.
And it still plays pretty well. But if you miss something in a board game, you can screw the game over bad.
Well, I think it's that, you know, most board games have a winning or losing scenario that a role-playing game doesn't, right? So if you screw up in a role-playing game, even if you screw up badly and break the game, it's like, well, we don't care because we didn't sort of invalidate this sort of result, right? It's just, we're just telling stories at a table, so it doesn't matter, right? Whereas if you mess up a board game, it's like, well, now the whole purpose of the thing is wrong, right? It's like this. It's like been defeated. It's like, why even continue? What's the point now?
Yep. Now we can't even, like, who doesn't matter who won. We've been playing Carcassonne wrong for 2 years. All those wins are invalidated.
Yep.
I mean, I got a good example of this. We picked up Legendary Firefly, and they have these cards in there, which are curse cards or bad cards, you know, like that you end up in your deck, and they cause bad problems. I didn't know that once you played them, they got discarded. This is a deck building game, so I thought they just kept getting more.
Yeah, I mean, that's how Dominion works, right? And usually when you have a
works.
similar mechanic in one game and you've played a similar game before, you just sort of make these assumptions. And if a game is doing something that's, you know, off the mark from other games that have the same genre, right? It's like,
And this made the game impossible to win. I mean, it really did. We never won a game until we read the rules and we went, oh crap, we've been doing this wrong.
So that's actually another interesting point because so many games are coming out and a lot of the games that are being published are, I don't want to say naive art. Like, I don't want to say like this is naive art, but it's a lot of people who haven't necessarily played a lot of games of different types. They've played games they like, and then they make a game they like, and they kickstart it, or they have a Patreon, and they work, and they make the game. But as a result, they don't follow the conventions that have existed in tabletop up to this point. They'll come up with a new way to show how a card has been used. Say tapping, for example. Or they'll do a draft, but slightly different. Or they'll have 3 good ideas, and they put them all in the game. 3 weird mechanics, as opposed to 2 mechanics everyone knows, and then 1 weird mechanic.
Something else I noticed, trend-wise, right, and this could be a whole panel in itself, is that the board gaming hobby as a whole, there seems to be a large emphasis lately of people who are into collecting board games and not necessarily playing, right? They care about like preserving the cards and getting high-quality miniatures and cardboard. And the same vein, those people are into like awesome art care what the game looks like, you know, the art on the board and the fancy art on the cardboard on the outside. And again, when you care more about that, there's less emphasis, on what the game actually plays like, how it is mechanically, the math behind the game, and those sorts of things, right? So as, more of the community is interested in those things, I see a lot of Kickstarted games where it's like, yeah, it's a nothing game. It's roll your dice and move your mice. It's not a new game in any way whatsoever. But look at it, how beautiful it is. Look at all these pieces. Oh my God. And people just all kickstart it and pile their money on it. When it's like a nothing game. It's, whatever.
Yeah, I don't know what to do about that.
I don't know what to do about that.
But it means that so many, the point is, the only thing I was getting at is that so many games are coming out that I think a lot of us spend more time learning games than playing games. Like, doesn't it feel good to play a game you already know? Mm-hmm. You already know the rules. You can sit down and just play it. Mm-hmm. I don't think I've had even one game at MAGFest so far where we didn't have to teach at least one person at the table how to play the game.
Part of it's our lives that we're older. When we were in college, we couldn't buy as many games, even though there were plenty that we didn't play, right? Even though there were less total available. And we would buy them and have a ton of free time to play them 100 times, right? We played Puerto Rico 100 times. We played Teeny a zillion times. Whereas nowadays, you're old, you can have more money to buy more games, but we have less time to play those games 100 times. And when you'd rather play a new game to get a new experience than play the same game 100 times. Right? It's like, if you're going to come to MAGFest and be like, let's play Puerto Rico again. It's like, people are like, no, let's play this brand new hot game that we just bought.
Even though, honestly, like a good trick, if you don't know which game to buy, because 20 new board games came out in the last 10 seconds, if you just wait a few years, the one people are still talking about is probably worth playing. And I'm increasingly relying on that heuristic to decide what games to buy.
All right, let's talk more about rules.
All right. Though, with the oral tradition thing, it's not just caused by so many games coming out now. It's not just caused by people not wanting to read the rules. Because, like in the US at least, Monopoly is a game that is like taught by parents to children. Like, there is a history and a tradition of teaching games to people as opposed to having them read the rules. I'd argue most people who play Monopoly on Earth today have never read the rules.
Probably. Most people don't even have a rules, right, when they get a Monopoly
What do you do
set.
with free parking?
Yeah. What do you do when you land on a place and don't buy it? Have any of you ever played a real Monopoly with the real rules?
It was awful.
I mean, it's not
awful.
good, but at least it's right.
So here's an example that's actually really funny to get to like the funny stuff. So Hanabi is a game where you're like making a fireworks show, and if you mess up too many times, the fireworks show explodes and kills everybody, and you all lose.
It's a co-op game, right? So you don't want to mess it up.
So this individual posted on Reddit asking if the game was broken because they were playing Hanabi, and based on what they wrote here, they were playing it like correct. They were playing the game. They knew enough rules to make the game work and get to the conclusion. And the question they asked was, well, if I'm not winning, remember it's a co-op game, no one player wins, and if I'm not winning, why don't I just throw down bad cards and blow it up so everyone loses? Which would be fine game theory if this was not a cooperative game. So it's not even a matter of like people not reading the rules. It's a matter of read the rules, played the game, but completely misunderstood the fundamental core point of the game. So it's not just that we're learning from our friends that don't know how to play. It's that it's hard to learn games. Even if you care, you try, and you read the rules.
Right, it's one thing, if you're learning a game or you're being taught from someone, right, you're now dependent upon, first of all, that person being right, that person being good at teaching it to you, and you being good at learning from that person, right? But if you're reading the rules, well, you're depending on the rules being written well, right, like Hans and Teutonica, and you having good reading comprehension, right, to extract the correct information from the rule book, right? Here we have a case where the rules of Hanabi are written perfectly well. There's nothing wrong with them, really. Nothing major. And this person was bad at reading.
So I see you've got some examples here.
I do. And so another, I think, reason that you were kind of hitting on here is that the rules themselves have to be constructed in a way that they are understandable, simple, clear. And so I've got some good examples here. Like this is the rule book for Dixit.
It's like 2 pages.
2 pages.
Yeah, that's a good one.
It's a very simple game. And the rules are pretty straightforward. They've got nice pictures. They've got some good examples. Here's the rule book for Ticket to Ride. Again, 4 pages, pretty straightforward. Although this I teach game studies, and this intimidated my students to the point that they looked it up on YouTube.
Wow.
Wow.
Interesting.
I really worry
These are
about
These are
today's
university
youth.
students?
4 pages.
How old
and
are
they couldn't read it.
How old are they?
Mentally or physically? Okay. No, I'm kidding. I love my students. They're great. And then here's the instruction manual for Settlers of Catan.
Well, one of them.
That giant book.
How many pages is it?
It's 16 pages.
Wow.
But,
I could write the rules to Settlers in a lot less than 16 pages, I feel like.
But they do have some pretty good layout and some pretty good design. Here is the instruction manual for Mansions of Madness. This is 56 pages. Now, granted, some of it's narrative, like there's story components. We got to give them that. But look, check this out. One side's faced this way, but the other half of the book is flipped, so you got to read it this way, and yeah.
And then there's another separate book.
And then there's a separate book, so you read this one first before you can get to the story, so you understand how all the pieces work. And I'm not saying it's a bad game, but remembering this.
Especially because I've played that game. It's not that complicated. I don't know I've never read those rules. Someone taught me the game. Though what's interesting is until very recently, I've been very intolerant of flavor text in games. Like, I just don't care. Like, as far as I'm concerned, it's cubes.
Well, in a role-playing game, I care.
Yeah, role-playing games are different. But in this kind of game, there's cubes, I'm moving them around, I don't care what they are, I'm producing red, and I'm sending the red guy to kill the blue guy. I don't care that that's the Templar, and that's the judge, and that's the bishop, it's just cubes. But I've recently come around to that because Cole Ware games, in particular, these are like super historical games that have a million bits of flavor text, and they teach you a lot more than you wanted to know about the East India Company. But I'm starting to see that appeal, but I don't know how to balance all that flavor text and all that nonsense with making a game easy, simple, like a codified, quick to learn, quick to play. because those games take like 4 hours to teach and 4 hours to play as a result with many people. So I have a very specific example.
Oh, we need this one to come up. Come on.
Yeah, this is a really good example. This is
a game called, what's it called? A Long Shot? And it's a horse racing game, right? Now, if you've ever imagined, a theoretical horse track, right, where people are betting on horse races, you imagine that, salty old man who's got a bunch of dollars and tickets in his fist going, "Come on, Lucky, woo!" And
oh, Gil's gonna eat food tonight.
And then his horse loses, and he goes, "Ah, nuts!" And he throws his tickets on the ground, right? So if you want to role play being that guy, you want to
Which we've all dreamed of.
You want to play Long Shot. So the way this game works is there's a bunch of plastic horses, right? And you bet on the horses, and then hopefully your horses win, and you get a lot of money.
So here's the problem. This card came up in the game. I took this picture at a PAX where we were doing a panel on how to write game rules, and we were stopped in our play by this card.
All right.
Because it says, collect $5 and bet it on horse number 4. Mm-hmm. Makes sense.
Easy enough. All
you
right.
could figure out what to do with that if you've never read these rules. Collect $10 and collect and bet $10 if you own this horse.
So if I'm the owner of number 4, I bet 10. All right.
So do I bet 10 or 15 if I'm the owner of this horse?
Right. It doesn't say and or. It just says bullet point, right? So you can sort of see, okay, well, if I'm just doing these as steps, step 1, step 2, step 3, if I own horse 4, of course it would be 15. But actually, you kind of read it, and it's like, well, I think it's kind of saying I should bet 10 instead of 5 if I own horse number 4. But it's not 100% clear. It's like it's ambiguous.
Yeah.
And then you may place this bet on a horse that is in the no bets area. I mean, okay, that makes perfect sense, because basically when horses get close to the end of the race, it's like, okay, you can't bet on them anymore. It's obvious they're going to win, right?
You can't bet on the roulette table right when it's about to stop rolling.
Right, same thing. But they could have rewritten that as you may bet on the fourth horse number 4 if it's right, because why mention on a horse if this whole bet can only go on horse number 4, right? It's sort of, it's broader than it needs to be, right?
So how do we resolve this situation? We go to the rule book. It doesn't clarify anything.
The rule book didn't clarify jack.
So we look at all the other cards in the game. Like, do all the other cards make sense if it's and versus if it's or? And it turns out it's both. We found examples that were clearly one or the other.
No, we found some cards where the bullet points were and, like clearly, like it's this and that. But some cards where the bullet points were or, right? And you can even see it on this card, right? Where the bottom one is clearly an and, right? It's like at least one of the 2 top things happens, but the third one definitely happens. You're doing at least more than one of these, right? So it's like, all right, it's probably the 15. No, it's the 10.
Yep. So we eventually go online, and we couldn't even find some errata. We just found people sort of agreeing that it ends up being collect 5 or 10, never 15. But there was no way to resolve this, so the game's still really fun.
It is a way good game.
But it lends to this issue of like when you design a good game, I'm curious your thoughts on this. If the way the game applies its own rules is consistent and logical, players can trust that consistency. So if they come to a situation they don't understand or might be ambiguous, all they need to do is look at how a similar situation was handled in other parts of the game, and they can self-resolve it without you writing a rule specifically for that edge case you didn't detect. But I find that most kickstarted board games do not have this level of consistency.
You're really hating
in the
them
rules.
kickstarted board games.
I've just had a lot of bad experiences recently. I feel really bad, but
No, I would agree with you, definitely. I think that the consistency is part of the structure, the system of the game. And if it's inconsistent and not purposely inconsistent, like flux or something like
Yeah.
that, if it's inconsistent within the game mechanics itself, then you're kind of stuck with that. Well, house rules. Who can argue the best?
which is tricky because there's always someone who has a vested interest in the rule going their way.
Yeah, that's always, it's like when I'm playing a game, I've played so many games and I don't care too much about winning and losing, right? So it's like if we get into a rules discussion in the middle of a game, it's like I'll usually default to like either A, going with what is I really believe is the right rule, regardless of whether it hurts me or not, and failing that, I'll be like, okay, whatever hurts me more, we'll go with that, right? Just to be like, so that there's no ambiguity of I'm picking I'm just saying the rule should be that because it helps me, right? But I think most players would actually tend to be like, well, that one helps me, so that's what I'm going to argue for if the rule is unclear.
I think this is more a problem, though, in games like that, like the Mountains of Madness, like the games that have lots and lots of fiddly rules where there's a lot of systems and a lot of things that behave differently from each other. I'm not going to say for no good reason, but for no good reason. But like, as opposed to a game where you have a system to resolve a thing, use the same system for every part of the game that has to resolve a similar thing, never have a different mechanic unless you have a really good reason to just enforce that consistency by default.
Right. So in the slide here, we have a picture of El Grande. El Grande is a great game. And in El Grande, there's a piece called The Grande, the big.
The big.
The big. And the big is on one of the places on the board. And the rule is you can never put your cubes in the place on the board where the Grande is. Under any circumstance, right? It's like, well, can I do it if I'm moving my guys this way? No. Can I do it if I'm moving my guys that way? No. You cannot touch that place ever. Period. End of story. There isn't some weird exception to the rule. So they didn't need to write all throughout the rule book, you can't use this to put your guys where the Grande goes. You can't use this to put your guys
Except apparently they did, because people consistently mess this rule up or consistently keep asking questions about it in the course of play all over the earth forever. It's the simplest possible rule, but players don't trust it. They always assume there's an edge case. Oh, but I thought because I could pick my spinner secretly, it goes there. Like, no, we told you, you can never touch the king.
Right. When the secret spinner happens, you can't pick the place where the Grande is.
People will pick the king, and then they're screwed because now the game is broken. We've crashed the board game. Congratulations.
Right. But it's a good rule. It's consistent. It never changes. There isn't like, oh, if this happens, then you can break the rule, right? It's always the same rule the whole game, no exceptions.
But I guess it sort of belies one of our points, because even such a simple and universally consistently applied mechanic is still, like, people mess this up all the time, even when it's as perfectly clear as it could be. It's like a textbook case of the rule being written correctly. So what's going on? Why can't people learn games? I look to you, Doctor.
Putting me on the spot there. Oh, gosh. I mean, I think that when we talk about games, we're talking about an element of play. We're talking about enjoying ourselves. And so sometimes, especially with play, we feel that the rules are a constraint to that. And so this, I'm just spitballing this.
Yeah.
But this is a potential possibility, is that, well, this was a rule, I can't do the El Grande, but I say if this, and this happens, it makes it a lot more fun if we can put the piece there,
I've noticed a lot of games will have their base rules that work fine, but then in playtesting they find like there's all these broken situations, and they'll add a lot of little fiddly exceptions like, oh, but you can't move the thing here, and you can't move diagonally on Tuesday, and if this person's winning, then you can't do, like, they have all these exceptions to rules, which almost gets people used to assuming that there's a lot of exceptions.
I wonder if, you'd have to see, like, based on what people's gaming history is, what games they've played, what games they've played the most, if that affects the way they view games they're now being exposed, right? It's like if someone comes from a Munchkin world and then you get them to play El Grande versus someone who comes from a Puerto Rico world and they're playing El Grande for the first time, right? Are they gonna be different based on the expectations they've gotten from previous games?
That's
right?
interesting.
Or their previous gaming culture, right? They played with people who didn't really care about rules so much and who were just messing around, or someone who came from even if they were playing Monopoly, they came from people who were actually doing auctions and actually read the rule, right? It's like, they come from that culture and they play with each other, right? How do they do things?
I think that's an interesting point, because if I think about where I came from, like the perspective of my gaming culture, I was playing garbagey games and video games and everything, but then, these German games appeared while I was in university, and Settlers of Catan was not well known back then. So this was like an awakening for me. So these people invited me over to play this weird German game, and they taught it to me. They taught me wrong, I'm pointing it out right now. They taught me wrong, and they taught me their nonsense house rules. They had this like dumb house rule where if someone gets the robber, everyone bribes them one card, and then they put the robber in the desert. They put it out of the way.
And if you don't bribe them, then they rob you.
Yep, like they taught me that was the rule. So one day I actually like read the rules to the game and saw that was BS. So the next time we played, I took everyone's bribes, I put it right on someone's thing anyway. because it was hilarious, and they refused to play with me anymore. And I was very wary of ever trusting anyone to teach me a game after that.
Right.
And I was like hyper focused on reading the rules before I played a game from that point on.
And then we played Settlers with ourselves, and we didn't bribe anyone. We just robbed the person who was in first place, which is exactly what you should do.
Well, that's how the game's supposed to be played.
Yeah.
That's right.
But I noticed that as I played more and more games, like once I started playing with different groups of people, people will have like these weird conventions of play. It's almost like contract bridge. Like if you go to Seattle, like people play Settlers kind of different from the way they play it here. And at MAGFest, like when people who play games with different cultures combine, suddenly like they misunderstand rules in a game that they both thought they knew.
Even if people are playing a game the same way, sometimes people use different words for things, and you get a lot of communication problems. Right? Even if the rules are the same.
Is it a go? Is it a turn? Is it a round? Is it a player order? Like, what do you call that?
Oh. I don't know if that's something that the rulebook should really even address. Is that something that, I mean, because otherwise our rulebooks would just get so thick trying to capture all those exceptions.
I got good slides for that. I was thinking about this. So one thing I've been really focused on lately when we do like talks on writing rules for games is the idea that words already exist to explain a lot of things, and a lot of board game books will explain things that there's already a word for, and either make up their own word, or just always say, you may move up, down, left, or right, but not up, left, up, down, up. Like, they'll just over-expense. So here's an example. What do you call that thing on the left? The movement type. Ooh.
Smart people.
So there's words for this, orthogonal movement and diagonal movement. And I've noticed that games that are have better written rules tend to use these two words and maybe like give some context, like, by the way, orthogonal means X, but then just use the word orthogonal for the rest of the rules. But at the same time, you can go too far with that, because if you use words like that and you use them in more advanced or complex situations, in a hex grid, what does diagonal movement look like? Because there is diagonal movement on a hex grid. So that's orthogonal. That makes sense, right? There's diagonal movement. Makes sense when you start to think about it. But then you get a grid like this, and now what the hell do you do?
You don't know what orthogonal and diagonal are on that grid.
I have no idea how to parse orthogonal and diagonal on this. But the point is that even if there's a word for it, there's a fine line between using complex terms and expecting your players to know them out of the gate versus defining all those terms, or even not defining a term for a thing and just explaining it over and over and over again in the rules.
Right. A lot of this is your audience, right? If you're trying to sell a game for money, right? It's like, well, who's buying this game, right? If you're trying to sell it to in, you know, the department store to everybody, right? Like the toy store, Target or something, right? You need to not use the word orthogonal, because the buyer at Target is going to read the rules for the game and say, we're not putting this on our shelf. No one's going to, you know, people are going to buy it, not understand it, and return it, right? But if you sell it, say, only at the game stores and the MAGFest where the nerds go, great. Use the word orthogonal. You're going to help, you know, people here seem to know that word, so you can totally use it. And
At least one person knew this word.
You'll make a better rule book that way. Yeah.
I was very happy. I played this game called Bear Park. It's a German game where you make like a bear park, even though 3 of the animals in it aren't bears. So,
All right.
But it specifically, the rules were like, place pieces orthogonally adjacent, and my soul just leapt into the air. I've never seen someone use that word just out of the blue. Bam, here it is.
But that is, I mean, even though there is a lexicon, it is oftentimes very community specific. I mean, when I teach my game studies class, one of the assignments is for them to design a game and give me a rule book for that game.
Ooh.
And so reading through these rule books, I can tell the people who play games regularly and the people who don't. And it's very clear in terms of the language, in terms of how it's explained, the clarity of it, the structure of it, because there's a pattern that we are often familiar with, especially within, you know, tabletop community, that we expect to see. I mean, we expect to see things at the very first page.
Here's all the pieces.
Here's all the pieces. And it continues in that vein. And so there's almost a genre. Rule books as a genre. Think about that.
Yeah.
Or genres of rulebook, right? The theme heavy one with lots of lore in it,
Yup.
right? And then is a different genre of rulebook than the normal one.
Also, the bad genre, like the early translations of a lot of German games from the 90s that just didn't actually explain the rules or were just wrong. That's a separate problem, though. But that also gets into not just the lexicon, but the idea of literacy, because I use this slide a lot because it really bothers me, but a huge percentage of adult Americans in the U.S., even if English is their
It's
primary...
only United States.
Yeah.
Other countries are better or worse.
But literacy is a complicated thing, and it edges into accessibility. It edges into a lot of social issues and social factors. So writing a rule book that uses the words of an advanced English literate person may be very inaccessible to a huge percentage of American adults for whom English is their primary language.
Or just English-speaking people in general.
Yeah. Even if just people, here's the money quote. So 21 to 23% of adult Americans are not able to locate information in text.
So, like, if they're trying to look in the rule book to find the rule that's relevant, they can't find it.
Yep.
Like,
Or
it's not that your rule book is at fault. Even a great rule book, they don't have the literate ability to find what they're looking for.
I mean, this basically says 21 to 23% of adult Americans could not read a rule book to a board game. Full stop. So your game you need to figure out, I guess, as a game designer, how are people going to learn your game, regardless of the level of literacy you aim it toward.
I mean, I guess that's why video games have stopped giving us those nice little instruction manuals.
Yeah, TIE Fighter came with this whole book that explained everything.
Civilization came
Loved those things.
They actually do. A lot of games, people don't know this, is a pro tip. A lot of games still are making the manuals in PDF form, and if you go on Steam at least, on the right side of the Steam store page will usually be links to get like all this other extra stuff, like PDFs to the manuals, the OST, MP3 downloads, all this kind of extra stuff is on this tiny sidebar of the Steam store page. So if you got some, complicated game you're playing on Steam and you're like, where's the rule book? You can try the developer's or publisher's website, or you can just go to the right side of the Steam store page. Pretty good odds is like a link to a PDF in there that's like going to be 100 pages long, and if that game came out in 1990 on a CD-ROM, you would have gotten that book like this.
Yeah. But games don't really do that. Like, games instead tend to rely on the Mega Man, shoot the thing to do the thing in the middle of the game and have the tutorial, which I'm pretty fine with. In the sense that it's almost like driving a car on a rail. Like, you can steer and you can have fun, but it's going to prevent you from just breaking the rules. Just start playing and the game will just kind of let you learn the game as you go.
Unfortunately, tabletop can't do that as easily.
Unless you abuse one of your friends to be the rails for you. Nope, you can't do that in Monopoly. No, you can't do that in Monopoly. Sit down, John.
Yeah, I mean, this is, video games, when you play a video game, it's like if you imagine the rules as like a wall, right? And learning the game is about discovering where the wall is and discovering the entire space within the wall. Because then if you discover all the space within the wall, you know everything you can do. And if you figure out where all the walls are, you know everything you can't do is outside the wall. So if you're playing a tabletop game, you sort of have to read the rules and construct this in your brain from words, right?
But even a video game can mess this up. I downloaded Night in the Woods.
I have Night in the Woods.
It's a fun game, but I sat at the loading screen for like 10 minutes because instead of hitting enter, because it highlights start and you think hit enter, no, you got to hit C.
Really?
There's nothing in the directions to tell you to hit the letter C. I just started hitting random buttons until I finally found the right one.
Oh, I played with gamepad. Wow. But the point is, right, is you hit random buttons until you get the right one. What happens in a video game is even if it's busted like that, right, which is not good, you can just do things, right? You can't cheat by accident. You can't cheat, period, unless you hack the game or something, right? You can just do stuff. Just start pushing all the buttons you can, and you will, over time, just explore the space and bump into the walls and learn where they are by exploring the same way, a Roomba learns the shape of your, the room that you're in and where it can vacuum and where it can't.
That didn't help me with Europa Universalis 3.
The room is too big. That's the problem with that. The room is too big. You cannot ever explore all of it.
But to get on your point, it's even worse than that because in UX is the idea of an affordance. So if you have a physical object, there's a thing you might intend someone to do with it, but because it's a physical object, it affords you other things. Like I'm supposed to use this to like laser pointer on the screen if I even turn it on and see how much time we have left in the panel, but it has an affordance. It's a physical object. I could just wing it at someone. I could just eat it. Like I could hit someone with it. I can do these things with it. It affords me these options. A video game doesn't have affordances really because you code the behavior you want exactly. But because this is a physical object, a board game is a physical object, it is very easy to put the game into a bad state by moving a piece. The affordance of a board game is I can move the pieces anywhere I want. I can eat them. I can huck them at someone.
You can put pieces on the board where they don't go. You can, deal cards. You can shuffle your deck upside down. You can mix up your deck. Some cards are face up and some are face down. You can just do whatever. There's nothing stopping you except for your knowledge and the knowledge of the other players who are enforcing socially, this is what you do and this is what you don't do.
I mean, there's really nothing in the rulebook, I think, of poker to hold the cards the wrong way.
It doesn't tell you how to hold the cards. You can hold them however you want. The casino might get mad. If you're at a casino, you have to hold them a certain way, right? They might yell at you if you don't. But like even, I've been in casinos and it's like, you say you're rolling dice in the casino and playing craps. The rule is the dice have to go all the way down the table, bounce off the wall at the other end, and then they count. If that doesn't happen, they don't count. You know what happens if you go to a casino and you're a moron and you just sort of roll the dice stupidly like a gamer and you don't bounce them off the wall? They say, yo, we're a casino, we like to take your money. We're not gonna not let you roll the dice and not let you gamble. We're just gonna say, bro, you messed up, roll the dice again. You gotta bounce them off the wall, right? They just help you out.
Though we can sort of get this now with apps. This is why I wanted Luke Peterschmidt here, because this is a thing that he's brought up a lot, that we're in a golden age of there are apps for a lot of new tabletop games. So I've found the most effective way for all your friends to learn a game before you play it is to have all of them get the app on their phone and play it while they're pooping. You can learn Race for the Galaxy by just futzing around with it, and you'll figure it out, and you'll be fine.
You can get Ticket to Ride off Steam.
Yeah. But there is a problem with this, and I've started to see this a lot as a result, and it's a problem I didn't really see before. I run into a lot of people now, like in the last couple of years, who know a game, even a really complex game. They play the game a lot, but they don't know all the rituals and setup. Like they couldn't set the board up. They couldn't tell you how to play, they couldn't answer a rules question, and they might not even know all the rules. They have no idea how many pieces come out on Tuesday in the game. But they can play the game if someone else does all those rituals in the game.
How many cards do you draw?
Yup.
Right. It's like the game just puts cards in your hand. You don't know the rule for how many cards you draw, maybe, right? Unless you're paying super attention. You're just sort of only performing the verbs of the game, right? And you sort of learn which verbs get you points and result in winning, but you don't necessarily learn the automated parts. I noticed this a lot when I played Netrunner for a few years. So in Netrunner, there's a lot of, when you play on the table, there's a lot of things you have to remember. For example, there's a really simple card. If you have it face up at the start of your turn, you get $1. Really simple, the most basic card in the universe. There was a bootleg way to play it online that I could not tolerate because the UI was so bad, but a lot of people used it, and a lot of people exclusively played that way because then they didn't have to buy any cards. And the people who played with that, well, at the start of their turn, if that card was face up, the game just gave them $1. They didn't have to go and get $1. So people who played Netrunner in person, after playing exclusively online, would have this card in their deck because it was good. It gave you $1 every turn, right? And they would flip it up because that was something they did online. But at the start of every turn, they would forget to take the $1. And then you'd be 10 turns in, and they're like, oh shit, I should have 10 more dollars. And I'd be like, well, maybe you shouldn't play on the stupid bootleg internet website and buy some cards, right? I got no sympathy for you. Look at all the money I have, because I know what I'm doing, right?
Now, I want to ask you guys this. How useful do you think YouTube videos are in terms of watching people play in terms of learning?
So I would say they'd be great, but a lot of them get rules wrong.
Right.
The thing that, like, a lot of YouTube tutorials teaching people games are just wrong.
Right, I'm gonna call out someone specific, right?
Uh-oh.
So yeah, why not? It doesn't matter. So there was this series on YouTube called Tabletop, right, where they would play games, and it had some famous...
I think they're batting 0 for rules.
I don't know if it still exists or not, because I watched... Okay, anyway. Had famous people in it, and it really, the production value was good. It was good in that it spread the word of tabletop to a lot of new viewers. It had a lot of positive aspects. But I watched 2 episodes, and in the first episode, they got rules wrong. And so I'm like, okay, honest mistake. It's their first time making a video. In the second episode, they got rules wrong, and then I never watched it again, right? It's like, if you had... It wasn't a live video, right? This is something, it was a recorded, edited YouTube video. You have time to make sure you get everything right? You're presenting this to the world. You should be perfect, right? You can edit the video if you're wrong and insert at least some text to say, yo, we got this wrong, everybody, right? So just like learning from someone in person, learning from a YouTube video is basically like learning from a person. And the quality of that learning is completely dependent on the person teaching you and whether they're good, and again, on your ability to learn from the video. But learning from a video, I guess, people are better at that than learning from words.
So to answer your question, we make them, but I don't trust anyone else's.
I might trust someone's, but I haven't. I usually don't go to those I usually learn from reading the rules.
We usually learn them from Chris Reimer, who just teaches us how to play.
Also that. But either someone I trust or reading the rules.
But we made one for Tigris and Euphrates a long time ago. We were trying to live stream tabletop games a long time ago.
We could try that again.
Yeah, but we taught some of our friends how to play Tigris and Euphrates, and then we just played the whole game. We recorded the whole thing. We put it online, and I noticed years later, people watched the hell out of that video. But in the comments on YouTube, many of the comments are, "Oh, you got this rule wrong."
No, I didn't.
Nope, those
No
people are
chance.
themselves wrong.
There is no chance I get a rule to Tigris and Euphrates wrong. I've been playing the game since like 2001.
I went and deleted a lot of comments of people who were giving wrong rules advice on our rules teaching Tigris and Euphrates video.
I guess the complexity of it probably has an impact as well, because if you're trying to teach something really complex through a video, unless they're pausing it every 10 minutes to kind of take notes, then, something like Dixit, okay, yeah, we can get that, but, watching somebody, put a gun together and then trying yourself, ugh.
The one advantage of the YouTube video, not over the in-person teaching, but over the rule book, right, is that the in-person teaching, you're taking up other people's time to do that. Right? The YouTube video, you're at least not taking up anyone else's time. You can learn it on your own from the YouTube video.
Except the person who made the YouTube video. We made one from...
It takes a lot of time from them, yes.
So we've started trying a thing. We actually have anecdata about this because we've started doing some things. The Penny Arcade Expo now has a tabletop-only PAX. So they started doing a room called the Learn and Play Room, where it'll be a panel, but instead of all these chairs, it'll be a bunch of tables. And if you come into the room, someone teaches everyone in the room how to play a game, and then everyone plays the game right there.
Right, so you've done this like 2 or 3 times already.
Yeah, they're 2 hours long. So we did one for Carcassonne, we did one for Puerto Rico, and one thing I want to say, it took me like a month to make the slides to teach Puerto Rico. That took like 118 slides to be able to show examples and teach the game.
The point I was trying to make is if you make a YouTube video versus a rule book, is that you can show the pieces moving, right? A rule book is not animated, it's just some paper. Right, so you can get your message across a little better in the video with the moving pieces.
You can make the very contrived example that shows all the edge cases in one go without having to fiddle around and find the right tiles and all that nonsense. Right. But what we found is that when we run these sessions, we teach for like 40 minutes. It takes about 40 minutes to teach most games, like I found, like most serious German style games.
If you talk as fast as we do.
Yep. And then we'll have everyone play, and I found that usually there's about 10 to 15 rules questions that come up among the people who we just taught how to play. And because we videoed us giving, they're on YouTube. You can watch these and learn to play Carcassonne and Puerto Rico. I watched our videos when I edited them together. No, we taught all the rules people asked about 100%. Everything that people had a question about, we did teach. They just forgot.
Or weren't paying attention, or who knows, right?
Yeah.
You can't absorb all. Who can walk out of this room and meet me after the panel and say everything that we just said?
Who even knows our names?
I've forgotten all our names.
They remember Luke Peterschmidt.
All right.
So I got a more fun question.
Okay.
What is the worst situation you've ever personally been in that revolved around someone messing up rules? Because I got a couple
See, for
of
me,
dingers.
it's like they're like big ones where like you mess up the game big time, right? It's like, okay, well, we just throw everything away and play again. The worst is when you mess up the game the tiniest bit and it goes unnoticed and you keep messing up that tiny bit for a long period of time and you say, wow, we've been playing this game a little bit wrong for 10 years. That's way worse.
That was Amon-Re.
We played
Amon-Re, Rainier Knizia bidding game. Actually, it's getting re-released.
It already got re-released. I saw it.
So it got reprinted. Get it. It's fantastic.
It's so good.
But Amon-Re, we learned this game on our own. We both read the rules. We agreed on how to play. We taught all our friends. We played this game for years.
We were playing it 99% right.
Yeah. One day, our friend Pete just like looking at the rule book. He's like, guys, you've been doing the bidding thing wrong forever. And he was right. We'd been doing it wrong forever. We had to teach all our friends the corrected rules. A couple of years go by. Someone else is flipping through the rule book. Hey, guys, you've been doing the farmer wrong, too. It's my deepest shame, that situation.
But the farmer it was such a tiny change. It wasn't like a big change.
Yeah, tiny change unless you have Dakla.
Unless you have Dakla.
But usually the situation that's the worst for me is the situation where you're playing a game and you teach the game well, but you don't teach all the fiddly crap at the end of the game. Because, like when you'd say, but there's like setup, the normal course of the game, the thing that ends the game, and then the fiddly bits, like what do all the 400 unique cards do? Or what are the 18 win conditions in the game? Or what's the final scoring? What's the fourth tiebreaker?
Yeah, we played, like I just said, I had Dominant Species on my shelf, and I finally played it once after so many years, right? And when I taught it actually perfectly, except I didn't teach at all the end game scoring. I was just sort of like, yeah, and then at the end of the game, this thing happens, the game ends, and we score, right? I didn't go into great detail about the end of game scoring, before we played. And then, of course, during the course of the game, people weren't thinking about it, right? Until we finally flip over the end of game tile and all these end of game scoring things appear, and people were like, oh, I didn't realize there was another way to get victory points. I was doing all these other things. I wasn't doing anything strategically to try to get those points, and they were mad.
But I find that causes the worst situation.
Because the game was long.
And I have so many anecdotes, I won't even tell one, but it's always the same scenario. I teach a game, we play it, everyone's having fun, but then someone missed one of the rules, or they glossed over the complicated nonsense at the end because I taught it and it took forever, they didn't care. And then they're salty because they lose because they didn't know that foxes are worth double points at the end of the game on Tuesday. But if I don't teach, so if I teach all those fiddly bits, they get bored, they don't listen, and then they get salty. If I don't teach those fiddly bits, they're not bored, they have fun, they lose the game, and then they're salty because I didn't teach them the fiddly bits.
That makes me, one thing that makes me personally really kind of, I guess annoyed is when I'm teaching a game and people aren't giving me their full attention, right? That's all I got to say about that. If I'm teaching a game, if I'm sitting there and going to read the rules for you so you don't have to read them, I want you looking at me and listening to me.
Oh, yeah, I redraft, whatever, just
not
draft,
looking
right?
at your
Yeah, it's
phone,
drafting,
not
it's
talking,
fine.
don't talk to anyone else, don't do anything. You are paying attention to me now, right? And if you get distracted at all, I'm like, stare at you and I'm like, hello, are we paying attention, right? I'll go over here.
It's just late, and I'm having trouble thinking. But I think for me, what comes readily to mind is when we confuse rules from other games. And so, and of course, the only example I can think of right now is a role-playing example. So we play a lot of role-playing games, and sometimes I get 5th edition, 3rd edition, Pathfinder, and sometimes even 2nd edition confused in terms of who's going first.
Wait, am I rolling high or low on this?
Yeah, high or low, or how do you save? Are there saves in this version? I mean...
Well, that's it. When it's because we talked about how we want to rely on conventions, like a draft. Like there's things that we all agree in the lexicon of gaming, but if you've played a lot of games, eventually there's 3 different ways to do the one thing. If you learn D&D first, you're just gonna assume, oh yeah, it's like D&D. Okay, initiative, let's go. Vinci and Small World is the one that really gets me.
That gets me a lot.
Vinci was a game. It's a great game. It's never been reprinted. It was re-released as a game you've probably all played called Small World. They're like 90% identical.
Right, it's made by the same designer, right? He made a game called Vinci, but Vinci had problems in that they didn't look great on the table. It was kind of ugly art.
Yeah.
And it was old and out of print, and it had typos in the instruction manual.
But the game is A+.
Right, but if you played correctly, which you can do, it's a great game. But which is why it was worth remaking as Small World. But when they remade it as Small World, they tweaked it. First of all, they fixed all the art. They improved it in a zillion ways and made it a big hit that sold a lot of copies. But they tweaked the rules slightly so. The biggest change was that in Vinci, the game ends when somebody gets to X points. So as soon as someone reaches a score of X, you finish the round, and whoever has the highest score wins. In Small World, the game is always X rounds. The game length is set. Right? And this is a huge, even though it's tiniest rule change, it's the biggest difference. Because in Vinci, you're like, all right, I'm going to get less points, so I'm right up against the edge, and then score as many as I can on the next turn. And it creates this sort of, hokey-pokey little dance on the last 2 turns.
If you sit at the table like I might have done and just assume it ends the same way as the other game you played that's 90% identical, and then the game ends and you lose because you're a moron, it feels really bad.
Right, well, and, in Vinci, it's like you're making these sort of interesting decisions on those last few turns that are really fun and clever. And in Small World, it's just get as many points as you can every single turn, no clever thinking whatsoever.
But that one's not that bad because there's at least a bunch of artifacts on the board that are like, hey, here's the thing that determines the game end. Rim was just dumb for not asking what all those things were. But the subtle change, the real problems are the subtle changes. In Small World, forests don't do anything. Forest is just a forest. It's just a kind of place.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
I don't play Small World.
In Vinci, they give you +1 defense, just like mountains. Who would even think that would be different? So as a result, we played the game where people were playing, like when me and Scott fought each other, we just treated Forrest like they gave you defense. And then when other people were doing their combat, they treated, until me and one of them had a fight, we had no way to know we were playing two different games on the same board.
Well, because even people who like us, who are doing a panel complaining about how no one reads, if I learn a game that's similar to a game I already know, I'm like, just tell me the differences, right? We recently got Yellow and Yangtze, which is Puerto Rico, but with a hex map.
Yep.
And I was teaching and playing it on New Year's, at a party to a bunch of people who had all played Puerto Rico, and I was like, look, it's Puerto Rico, let me tell you what's different. But then I was like, wait, no, I'm gonna go over the whole thing. Right? I'm not just going to be like, this is different, this is different, this is different, because I missed something. And of course I did. I missed like two things, that I didn't miss two things that I probably would have missed had I done the lazy teaching.
Right? Yeah, now that I think about that more and more in terms of that, again, getting back to that idea of what culture did you grow up in, or what culture do you play games in, and how that influences the way you look at games, I've realized the way I teach the people in like my local close-knit community about games is this is drafting like in Seven Wonders. I'll always just say this is this other game's mechanic, this is this other game's mechanic. And pretty much any game, there's enough other games my friends have played where I can just cobble together the rules from a bunch of other games. And then here's the parts that are different.
But you can't do that to someone who's not played a game before.
Nope.
You have to teach everything.
No, gosh, no.
All right, this is what a draft... And look at how much you can condense the rules. For me to teach you, like, what a draft is would take a lot of words. But I could just tell Rim, yeah, we're going to draft 5 cards clockwise. That's all I got to say, literally. And everyone, now he knows exactly what I'm talking about.
I mean, in the game class that I've taught, I've had people who have no experience with games whatsoever. And when we bring out even a simple game like Flux, draw one, play one. What do I do again? What does play mean?
We had a friend, so poker, same deal. A lot of nerds don't play like traditional card games like poker or like hearts or euchre or something. We were playing Pandante, which is fun panda poker. I assumed I didn't have to teach the rules of poker. I just had to teach the rules of Pandante. So I teach Pandante and we're playing it. And our friend plays a straight that was like 7, 8, 9, 1, 2 wrapping around because they just that's
The panda poker only goes to 9. There's no 10 Jack Queen.
It seemed like it
they're
made
pandas.
sense. Like, if you haven't played poker, you wouldn't even know that. And because I've played a lot of poker, I just assumed. Or trick-taking. Trick-taking. Do any of you play trick-taking games?
Yeah. If I say, like, oh, diamonds are Trump, that's all I got to say. But imagine having to teach someone, like, this is what Trump means.
Yup.
It's not the president, someone else.
Actually, teaching people who don't know games is actually a really good way of really reflecting on the game rules themselves, because then you have to phrase it in a way that is clear to somebody who didn't grow up with other kinds of games they can compare it to.
Yeah.
So you have to really understand, all right, what is Trump? What does that really do for the system of the game? And so that's, I think, it's a fun experience, but at the same time, it can be challenging.
Yes.
I think if you're playtesting games, right? Once you've got your game rules set, all your playtests should be you hand them the rule book. You don't teach people the game, right? Your playtesters, you just give them the rule book, you give them the stuff. You say, all right, play. I'm going to watch you, or play. Fill out this report when you're done, right? And you don't watch them, or maybe make a video or something, right? And then you definitely have to playtest the rule book, or at least get people to read the rule book who don't know anything about games. Right? You can't just only have nerds read it unless your game is only for nerds.
I think in general, like the sort of, because we're getting near the end, we got about
Good.
minutes left? We got about 7 minutes left.
Almost fulfilled my free badge obligation.
Yeah, we only have to do one more panel tomorrow.
Hooray.
So I guess, like from a teaching perspective, like as teachers of games, or just teachers in general, making society better, we need to take, just like we do or should do in education, a multifaceted approach. Any game that comes out should have the rules written to teach you how to play, like the book that says, here is how to play, how to learn the game. They should also have the separate book that is here's the reference. Like, it has to serve as both a teaching tool and a reference to learn the game. Also, make an app if you can, so some people can learn that way. Also, make an official YouTube video if you can, so there's another way. Give people a lot of different ways to learn the game.
Also, you got to, I noticed a lot of game publishers are sort of, some of them are very active about updating or catching errata, because no one's perfect. Even a game that's been super play tested and, by pros and by new people, it's like you can make a mistake, right? Especially if a game is complex. right? It's almost impossible not to make a mistake. Just be active and involved, so that if there is an errata, you can post an answer that's clear. You can then go and republish your rulebook, PDF at least, even if you can't reprint the paper one. Get out there and fix it. There's a lot of questions I've had about like, all right, here's an unanswerable thing, and no one has an answer, and we never get an answer from the designer, from the publisher, from anybody. And
if a game can be broken,
and
somebody will find it.
I just sell those games. It's just like I don't play them anymore. It's pointless.
Hellas.
Hellas was the one I was thinking of.
Hellas was this fun 2-player game about Greeks and ships, and it looked really fun. Like, we were really enjoying it.
It was really fun, yeah.
We played one card. It's been so long, I forget what card it was. We played a card.
I think it was the Zeus card.
Yep. We couldn't agree on how to resolve it. There's no answer to that question.
So we just thought we sold it.
Well, no. First we thought, well, what are the odds? Because it's a really weird situation that occurred.
I think it was a common situation that happened in like 2 out of 3 plays.
It felt like a really weird, uncommon situation. So we thought, let's just play again. Maybe it won't come up. It came up literally every time we played. I don't know what you do, and the rules themselves are just broken. But I think game designers, too, especially need to, if you're designing a game, you need to at least look at, if you have a mechanic, are there other games that do this mechanic? If there are a lot of games that do a similar mechanic to yours, consider making your mechanic work the same way as the consensus, unless you have a really good reason to do it differently. And you probably don't have a really good reason to do it differently.
Yeah, are we trying to roll high or low?
Yeah. Like in music theory, if you learn how to write music, don't do anything weird until you know how to write music that follows the basic rules of music and make those work, and then do the weird dissonant stuff. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, you're just making naive art, which tends to not be that enjoyable when it's a game.
But, it's like if your game, whatever your game is, whatever kind of game it is, video game, tabletop game, RPG, whatever, there's something your game is about. Right? It's like, what is this game about? Why does it exist, right? It's a bidding game. Okay, it's a bidding game. The bidding part is fancy and unique. Everything else in the game better be boring and cookie cutter, right? Do not make anything else. If it's a bidding game, but I also need these dice. Those dice should be normal and boring, and gamers and other people it should just be natural.
Oh, nothing grinds my gears more. I pick up a die that looks like a D12. I roll it. It's 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3 on that die. Why do people do this?
Right? Right, so it's like take the thing that your game is about is where you should put all your special and different things that are exceptional that people have to learn, and all the other parts of your game, because your game can't just be one part. That's where you shouldn't do anything different at all, because you're just going to mess people up.
Or make your game just one part. Make a toy game, like QE.
I like a one-part game.
Yeah. Elkfest. All the games that there's like one rule, and you just play the game.
All right. Can we leave now?
No, we can't leave yet.
We need 3 more minutes.
We got 3 more minutes.
What are we going to talk about for 3 minutes?
We could do something we never do. We could take one question from the audience.
Oh, wait, but before, I have to kill 3 minutes by telling you my rules of question. I have rules of question asking. All right, here's my rules of question asking, and if you break them, I will shut down your question. All right, rule number 1. Did you put them in here?
No, I didn't.
I have to remember them all.
I didn't think we'd take questions.
Okay, number 1, you have to actually ask a question. No statements, no treatises, nothing like that. You just ask a question. Like 1 sentence is good.
Can I have a screed?
Number 2, your question must be relevant to everyone in the room. Don't ask me a question about your personal game you're working on or something like that, right? Come ask someone out after in private, right? You're wasting everyone's time in here with your personal question. Ask something relevant to everyone, and I forget the 3rd rule. What was it?
I think we're good.
No selling stuff.
No. Yeah, don't tell us about your game in general. What do you got? Raise your hand. Let's go.
That guy,
right
he was
here.
fastest. Purple shirt was fastest.
What are your opinions on when people are explaining rules, they usually pepper in a bunch of strategies?
Ooh, that's a really good question. The question is, what do we do about our opinions on people giving strategy tips while teaching a game?
Well, part of the fun of game is learning those strategies, learning the mechanics of the game so that you can learn what works in the game, what doesn't work in the game. When somebody's giving you that kind of cheat book, I think they're taking a little bit away from it, and they're also railroading you into playing a particular way. It's more fun to try and explore your own, so I disagree with it.
I also disagree with it in the sense that bridge, or a lot of card games are a perfect example. People will teach bridge in card games like it. They'll teach these complicated bidding rules that you use to communicate with the other player that are like this meta nonsense on top of the game. But they'll often forget to actually teach that the game is about taking tricks.
Now, if they ask for it, if they ask for help, then I think it's okay.
Now, as another caveat, we've been doing a panel lately where when we teach a game, the deal is it's not just learn and play, it's learn and win. We teach the game, and advanced strategy at the same time.
We tell people we're doing this in advance.
We warn them, like, yo, we're going to ruin everything about this game. No one will ever play it with you after you learn from us.
So I do what both of them said is 100% true, but also there are some games where it's like, for example, say Age of Steam, right? I played Age of Steam and no one taught me any strategy, and I played it once.
You were bankrupt in the second round?
So that game, when you're bankrupt, thankfully, I actually like this, that you're eliminated from the game and you get up and leave. So I was bankrupt on like turn 2 because no one taught me how much loans to take or what kind of moves were strong. So I just bankrupt on turn 2 and I got up and left, which is great. I didn't have to sit there for 8 turns of losing, right? But also it's like, there's some situations where in a game, depending on who you're playing with, do the other players have a high level of skill and you're new, right? And maybe there are certain things you might explore that are literally just you die, don't do that, right? And you sort of need someone to tell you those things before you start. Like, it's probably okay to tell someone if they're playing Mario, yeah, if you touch bad guys, you die, and if you fall in holes, you die. Right? I guess those could be considered rules, but it's also like strategy. Like, okay, you want to run and then jump right before the hole. That's strategy, kind of, right? So there's a line between strategy and rules, but there's some strategy things that are just like, you need to know these or this game will be awful for you.
That's
and
true.
you need to tell someone those depending on, unless they're all noobs, then it won't, maybe they won't die. But if there's a good person who's going to play properly, because you shouldn't, if you're a good person playing with noobs, you know, okay, sometimes you're not going to try to win, but you probably
Sometimes the best way to learn, though, is to fail.
That's also true.
I learned to play Magic the Gathering with a guy who played professionally. We played for 4 hours straight. He beat me every single game, but I learned that game.
That's how I learned chess. I never beat the person who taught me chess. Never once.
But you
Never even got
played
close.
a lot of games of Magic, so you had a lot of opportunity to play and then relearn, play again with the learning from your mistakes, right? With an Age of Steam, the game takes hours. If you're limited on turn 2, you're not getting a chance to learn from your mistake.
I think
you're not playing again.
There's a line there. Like, I will not get better at basketball playing against Michael Jordan.
True.
Because I will not get better at boxing by boxing Mike Tyson.
Right? Even now, probably. Right? But it's like, yeah.
But we ran into a weird game that did it, and I think it needed to do it. Sidereal Confluence. This is trading something in the Elysian Quadrant. This game,
all you do in the game is trade cubes. That's
like,
it.
there's 10 different kinds of cubes, and you just throw them all over this giant table, and you're just like,
we went over our time. We're good.
We got that. Like, I'll give you 3 green cubes for 2 blue cubes and a promise and it's just trading. It's nonsense. But the game, every card has a little thing that tells you the rough value proposition of every machine that can turn cubes into other cubes. It'll be like, this machine turns 2 blue into 1 green, and that basically turns 1.5 victory points into 2 victory points. Like, it gives you a heuristic to follow. So it basically avoids the situation where, like, it lets you skip the baby's first exploration. So every player starts at like this novice.
You know, a real
intermediate
simple
level.
example of that is Settlers, right? So in Settlers, on this board here, you've got all these numbers of where the resources are going to appear if you roll a certain number, and the 6s and the 8s, which are really likely to roll, have a bunch of red dots under them, sort of telling you, even if you don't know the odds of 2d6, like, yo, 6s and 8s is where the things show up. And like the 12 and the 2, they got 1 dot under them, and that's telling you, yo, these things don't get rolled. Don't put your settlements next to those unless it's late in the game or something.
And with that, we're 100% out of time. I hope this was enjoyable. So I'd say someone should go to the rest of your panels, but you're free.
I'm done.
You're done. We have one more tomorrow. It's a lecture. It's not a panel.
Who's actually going to be at MAGFest tomorrow? Oh, wow, okay.
This is the brand new. We've done a talk that's on YouTube. If you grab one of these ancient flyers, you can go to our website, and we actually have video of like hundreds of these talks we've given.
You know, I kept telling people, like, hey, show up to MAGFest late Thursday. Things don't really start until later. And leave MAGFest early on Sunday because they tear it down while you're still there. But maybe that's changing. Maybe you got to come early on Thursday and leave late Sunday.
Yeah, MAGFest is a growing thing. But we're doing tomorrow at 1 p.m. the 40 games you must play.
It's a lot of fun. These guys do a great job.
We put a lot of thought into this one. It's brand new. We've
No,
never
you
done
didn't.
this.
You cut that out like 5 minutes before we came to MAGFest.
I spent at least 8 minutes on that panel.
Okay.
Thank
Good
you
night.
all.
Bye.
Good job, guys.